Hello and welcome into Reality Check by Talking Jets. What is going on? I am Matt O'Leary, joined by my co-host, Jets Chaos, Jeremy. Welcome to the show. I'm excited to get this one rocking and rolling with you, my friend.
Absolutely. Nothing like a premiere of a new show.
Gotta love it. So we're the last to go. If you missed it, if you're tuning in and somehow missed the other episodes, we had the 𝐒𝐫𝐞𝐞 and Green Bean dropping the gloves last night. Jeremy, were you tuned into that? Did you check those two guys out going on Bryce Huff?
Oh, I was instigating like crazy in the chat. I was like saying, how long is it until Green Bean is strangling 𝐒𝐫𝐞? How long is it until 𝐒𝐫𝐞 is pulling out baseball bats? The whole thing.
I love it. And Dom and Ryan went on Monday night. So we got 3 days in a row of, well, 4 really, 4 days in a row, 3 new shows added. We are the last one to go, but really excited to get it rocking and rolling. So what Reality Check is going to be is Jeremy and I are going to be going through different storylines throughout the week and seeing if it's real or if it's something we should be worried about or not. And, you know, unfortunately, Jeremy, I know you feel this way too. We got a lot of takes or a lot of things said about the Jets online, and you sit there scratching your head going, I don't know. I don't know about that one. So we're going to put that to the test on this show.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just so many takes out there that it's not that the takes are wrong. People will spit out facts. The problem is they're outliers. That it's not evidence, like one outlier, one piece of information is not evidence that something is always true.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's a great place to start on this program, Jeremy, with the reality check of something that I know you've seen a lot of online. Is it's okay, the Jets could pass on offensive line in the first round because they should be able to find offensive line, especially at offensive tackle outside of round 1. But I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that one. And I think you feel the same way. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we'll prove that one. We'll go through and talk about it.
Right. And it was hard to decide where to even start with that one because I've heard people say, and this is their evidence, offensive line is not important as weapons. And they say, look at Cincinnati when they took, and they love to use the Cincinnati example because of one outlier team that went to the Super Bowl because they didn't take an offensive lineman. What they don't rule out is let's look at the top 4 teams for the last 10 years every year in the NFL and see where their offensive line ranks. It doesn't mean that they don't have great weapons also. It just means you can't take an outlier as your evidence for something that's just not true. Offensive line is extremely important. There's a tremendous amount of evidence, we'll go over some of it, that show if you want to win football games, you have to have an offensive line.
Yeah, clearly. And another thing too, before we pull the numbers and the stats up on here, I don't know how anyone who watched the Jets in 2023 could come away with the conclusion that it's not super important and that it's something that they desperately need to attack. And it's an area where they need 2 to 3 new starters on the offensive line. I think that's absolutely a position that they could go and probably should go in round 1.
Yeah, it's hard to justify not picking an offensive lineman. I mean, look at last year. Last year wasn't even as dire as this year, and I think the majority of the fan base lost their mind when we didn't take an offensive lineman at 15.
That's true. That's a great call out there. So, all right, where do you want to start in this process of trying to figure out where, if the Jets should take offensive line, wide receiver, weapon? What's the first set of numbers we want to pull here?
Well, the first thing we should do is I'm going to share it. I want to share an article, and this is just a collection of information that we should all be aware of, something that I found interesting. I'm going to bring this up right now. This is an article that lists the top 10 offensive linemen from last year. Now, if I scroll down this list, I assume you could see it. Okay, obviously we start with Williams from the 49ers. And by the way, pay attention to the teams that have these offensive linemen. So that's an important thing to keep in your mind too. Because again, we're always, part of this is that it actually matters to have a great offensive lineman. But if you look at the top 10, Trent Williams was a first-round pick. Not for the Niners, but that's how he originated. Lane Johnson years ago for the Eagles was a first-round pick. Tristan Wirfs, we all know, was a late first-round pick because he was taken after Mekhi Becton. Andrew Thomas was a first-round pick. Here's the one outlier. We have an outlier here in Jordan. Jordan was actually a 7th-round pick. It was a freak pick years ago. The important thing to remember about him is he's been on the team forever. So it's, that's just an argument of why we have to not give up on players, develop players, maintain and keep players, and get continuity in our offensive line. Here's a first-round pick in the 2017 draft. He's number 6, Ryan Ramczyk. Rashawn Slater, we all remember him. He was a prospect that the Jets loved, first-round pick. Laramie Tunsil was a first-round pick. Christian Darrisaw was a first-round pick. And, of course, Sewell was a first-round pick. So we have 9 first-round picks for the top 10 tackles in the NFL last year.
Yeah, so that's a great – I mean – and that's not the only thing we're going to pull, but that's a great jumping out point on if you want to find quality. It's not always a guarantee. That's the tough part too, is I think people are assuming, oh, if you take this position in the first round, they're guaranteed to come in and be great. And that's not the case, but you're significantly more likely to find your guy, so to speak, in round 1, the earlier you pick than the later. So that's also something important to note too, because you're going to get, as you said, the outliers. Jordan Mailata was the outlier for the Philadelphia Eagles, but 9 of the 10 are first round picks, which I think is, again, pretty telling.
Right. And anybody who makes when you make the argument, when you pick one outlier and say, well, you don't need to go in the first or even the second round, look at Kansas City. They took an offensive lineman in the 6th round, and he's a great starting right tackle for them right now in the NFL. Okay, but does that mean I could just as easily do that with wide receiver. I could say Tyreek Hill, who's arguably.
Oh no. Did I lose Jeremy on here already? Hot start, man.
So I'm already back. So it doesn't mean just because we could pick outliers and examples that's evidence that we do or don't need to use a first-round pick to address certain positions. I mean, the reality is plenty of NFL players in the league come from all the different rounds, even undrafted. The reality is very simple. The reality is that you have, for every position, and it just makes sense, you have a better chance of hitting in the first round than any of the rounds. Now, some people will combine and say second round, all the rounds combined and undrafted versus the first round. That's not fair, because that means you'd have to take that position in every single round and one in undrafted free agency to find one that could match up against the first round pick. And one of all those other picks might be a hit. So it's not a fair comparison. The reality is you simply have the best chance at finding a player of any position when you make that choice in the first round. Now, we can look, there's a picture I sent you that we could bring up that shows all positions. It shows just success by rounds. Like it's start by rounds, and we can take a look at that. And you can see some tendencies in this chart.
Here we go. Okay. A nice little look there. Round 1, 29.9%. Round 2, 17.5, 3, 12.6. Round 4, 10.8, 6.4, 4.9, 4.2. So
this is based on the entire NFL, all the numbers combined. We could look later. Offensive line, just so you know, just so everybody knows, has the highest percentage of first round and second round combined success than any other position, offensive tackle.
Yeah, we could look at you want to pull that one up next?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Yes. Let's pop and go to that. I think this is the one that really jumped out to me, and one that I thought was interesting. When you look at 51% right there. That highlighted in green, and for good reason, right, Jeremy? 51% left tackle, 20% right tackle. Now, there seems to be some success in rounds 2 to 3 also, But what I'm noticing is that is the center and guard range. And for the Jets, they have a obviously top 10 pick. They don't have a second round pick. And then they pick again in round 3 at 72. I think, to me, does that not scream offensive tackle? And then you're making your selection in round 3 on the somewhere on the interior, whether it's center or guard, depending on what they want to do with Joe Tippmann?
It absolutely does. And that's why when you watch mock drafts from guys like Dom C, you'll see that he'll even go to the 4th round sometimes on some of those guys that are there, because this happens to be a really good draft on the interior. But often you'll see Dom C say, I really like that guy, but I'm not going to use this pick on that guy right now, because there's plenty of them in the middle rounds. And we have a lot of evidence right here that for those positions, it's much easier. And that's why I think a lot of us have been saying, because we have the versatility with Tippmann, we have this great flexibility where in the 3rd round, we don't just have to look at guards. We could look at centers as well, because the option to take a really good center, if that's our best player on the board, and move Tippmann into the guard position, is an option because of his versatility.
No, but I know it's slightly off topic, but just that while we're on Joe Tippmann, do you have a preference if you want him at center or guard in 2024?
My preference is based on what's best for the team after the draft.
I love that answer, because I was going to say mine is basically the same thing. If they go into next year and they find even go back further and go free agency, we have no idea right now where Joe Tippmann's going to play, where Elijah Vera Tucker is going to play. But I think at the start of free agency, when we see guys start to get signed, that's when we're going to have a better idea of, okay, the dominoes are starting to fall and where they could potentially be going. But specifically the draft for the interior, pick 72, or even the 2 4th rounders, those are 3 picks right there where they could take a long look at either center or guard, I think, anyway.
No, absolutely. And there's some names we've been throwing out already. And this is just data from pretty much every player right now starting in the NFL. That's where all this data is coming from. So it's a big sample, when you're looking at these kind of numbers. So it just backs up what we're saying, right? So it's like when someone says, oh, you can get a center in the 3rd round, and that's the way it tends to be. We're not just saying that because of one example. We're not, we're saying it because it's a fact. It's reality. It's based on real numbers. It's based on real percentages. Now, you could see also, though, the difference between the discrepancy between left tackle and right tackle, where an argument of why with that 10th pick we would really want to go left tackle, if we want the best chance of hitting. There's an argument for that, because the left tackle seems to be, the higher percentage, which is why I think Jet fans are a lot of them that are more excited about the guys that can play on the left side and have that versatility.
No, absolutely. And also, now I want to get your take on this too, but I think part of it is the tackles that go later aren't always necessarily afforded that opportunity to start. And sometimes it has to do with like just a talent level, right? Like you already have the left tackle in there, but it feels like more often than not, you draft a tackle in round 1, there's this inherent bias that you could put them in at left tackle and things should be okay right away. Whereas if you're drafting someone beyond that, I don't think you necessarily feel like they are, a comfort spot to be at left tackle right away. They start on the right side and then maybe eventually move over to the left side.
No, absolutely. I think there's that's a great point, that a lot of players start in a different place, and only when they've proven themselves, they move over and they move over to left tackle. That's going to help those statistics. But as well, on top of that is typically, or often, only the guys that are picked really high are even going to be given the opportunity to play left tackle. So, for example, a guy like Alt is going to probably have the opportunity to go right into right tackle, which is going to, being that he's going to hit, and I think we all think he's going to be successful, that's going to help the numbers for the left tackle position. And it's definitely true that when you take the weaker tackles, like the tackles that aren't rated as high, you typically start them at right tackle because you don't trust them to play left tackle yet.
Exactly. And then eventually, who knows, either they get drafted at right tackle and they stick there, or after 2 years you end up, adjusting it as we see fit. But something else, another one that you shared with me that I wanted to pull up is the hit rate or the success rate. I think that's also a good one too, right? So we showed the percentage of starters in each round, but also how likely are you to hit on one of those starting caliber? We know the number was 50, what was it, 53 in the first round. If you go to offensive linemen, again, we're just looking at offensive linemen here. Of the past 421 players, 147 wound up as starters for at least half their career. The first round has an 83% success rate. Second round is almost as good with 70%. Even the third and fourth round aren't too shabby in comparison to other success rates at other positions in the same round. But you almost don't want to, like that 13% drop off from round 1 to round 2. And the Jets don't have a second round pick in this instance to even play that game.
That's the problem.
But yeah, that's the biggest problem, right, Jeremy? Like they don't have that second round pick. So you're dropping to 83% to 40 if you wait.
Right. And that 40 doesn't reflect, that's not saying first year starter successful right away. We also know that there's a much greater chance that the first group of guys, right, those first 4 guys, top 4, top 5 on the board, have a much better chance of being a plug-in starter versus a guy that you take in the 3rd, 4th rounds, a Carter Warren type of player that may be a hit. He might be a very serviceable starter someday, but not guys. There's reasons why those guys slip. And a lot of those reasons involve they need time to develop.
Yeah.
And the Jets don't need a player that's going to develop for the future. The Jets need a player right now.
That's another thing that I think you have to take into account here is it feels like, and again, correct me if I'm wrong or if you feel otherwise, last year there wasn't as much pressure on this regime, and they felt like they could draft Will McDonald, who is more of a future pick than for the right now, where that pressure, it feels like it's been cranked up. So I don't think they could go to a spot that would be considered a luxury position. They almost have to be drafting for need early in this one.
Yeah, I think things are a lot different this year than last year. I think last year there was a lot of excitement about Aaron Rodgers. No one was able to foresee that he was going to go down the 4th play. No one knew that was going to happen. We certainly didn't think that we were going to be decimated on the offensive line for the 2nd year in a row. So while it would have been great to get an offensive lineman last year, there was some room for gambling, right? There was some room to roll the dice. And, Becton did end up playing 15 games. I mean, it wasn't good, and he dropped off at the end after the ankle injury. But the reality is there are some things that actually worked in that gamble. But, Rodgers going down, the rest, AVT going down again, McGovern going down. I mean, it was just too much. Too many guys, got injured. I think this year the difference is it's now been 2 years in a row. We have nobody returning. The guys returning. AVT hasn't played a full season, obviously. The only solid guy we have, Lakin hasn't played well. The only solid guy we have is Joe Tippmann. So I think the reality is we're a year further. This is the run back year. This is the last chance year. They are on the hot seat. I don't think they could. I think they have to change and shift a lot more to the now than to the future than we were last year. Last year, we could argue, and some people will argue, and they're not incorrect, that we should have already been in the mode of right now.
I agree. That's what I was saying last year.
Right.
The first round pick could have been for a right now kind of thing.
But it's almost impossible to think that even JD is doesn't feel that urgency at this point. I know that these guys have been very stubborn about the way to build a team, but let's just face it, a lot of guys won't be here if this team doesn't compete next year. And to compete, we have glaring needs. Now, I wanted to bring up that wide receiver piece in that same article, like we talked, we just showed for wide receivers, because I don't want to claim that wide receiver is not important. And I also want to point out, and this is going to back up, I think, kind of a situation that I know Ryan wants, I know you want, I know Greenbean wants. A lot of us have called for this, and I'm going to get to it, but I want to back it up. Wide receiver is another position where you do really well in the first round, but also can do well in the second round. Okay, because the second round you could see is 49% as opposed to 58%. But again, look what happens when we go to the third round. It drops down to 25%. See, so we have the same exact problem with offensive tackle as we do with wide receiver. And I do not dispute what anyone says. Garrett Wilson is not enough. I love him to death, but he needs somebody to play opposite him that could scare defenses. And right now we don't have that.
See, here, and I think you'll agree with me on this, but I feel a lot better about adding wide receiver help in free agency than I do the offensive line. So like the numbers that you bring up here are important to note. 58% in the first round. That's a really good number. Second round percent, almost as good. 49. The Jets must own like the other 51% in all these misses, right? With all the second round misses on wide receivers.
Absolutely.
It feels like, but I think they should still take a swing somewhere in the mid rounds, but no, I'm not saying draft that guy and then like, I don't know, Malik Washington, for example, has been in a name that's been brought up a lot recently because the Jets supposedly met with him and is someone who's supposed to go in like somewhere between the third and fifth round, let's say, give or take. I'm not saying draft him and plug him in as the second wide receiver. That is you're drafting someone or adding another body for depth in that, we'll say, wide receiver 3, 4, 5 spot, but they should also be looking to add a wide receiver two through free agency.
Yeah, I definitely agree that free agency right now, if you look at the market, even though it's thinning for wide receiver as well, we could definitely get, because we're not looking for a number one wide receiver. Whereas with tackle, we want every Jet fan. We're not asking for just some meh kind of guy. We want a real tackle, right? We want to protect Aaron Rodgers and get Breece Hall as much yardage as possible. So yes, I agree. It'll be easier to address that second round weapon. But here's that second weapon in free agency. Here's the beautiful thing. All of that happens before the draft. So our situation and everything is going to be different on the day of the draft than it is right now. But if we're talking right now, and let's assume the worst case scenario,
sure,
we can't get the players we want. We don't feel good about anyone we signed. You know, maybe JD does his value stuff and fill some roles, but let's just say we don't get the player that we feel good about. I want to get back to the point of the reason I pointed out that wide receivers also have a good percentage in the second round is to highlight the need for a trade if there's a partner. I know everybody says, well, it takes two to tango. We know that. But here's the beautiful thing. If a guy like Bowers or Ndunze or Neighbors or any of these guys were to slip to us at 10, not to mention quarterbacks like a Jaden Daniels, right? Even somebody might want to be panicking because a lot of quarterbacks might go. You might have a team, for example, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who panic and want to trade up and secure J.J. McCarthy. Let's say, because they're worried because on their board, after J.J. McCarthy, maybe they don't like Bo Nix and there's nobody else. So in those kind of situations, if there is a partner to trade, it is so overwhelmingly evident that if we haven't addressed a weapon to complement Garrett Wilson and we haven't fully addressed the offensive tackle position, the best path for us is to trade down somewhere around into the 20 spots or into that area and look at the guys that might slip. J.C. Latham, if he's gone, even if Tyler Guyton is the one that's left, guys like that, Mims, Darius Mims. So there are players, and you could see statistically, they're still first rounds, and there's still players that we could look at that point of the draft. The other option, once we do that, and if we were to trade down and secure a nice second round pick, now we have the option also to go best player on the board. Let's say Robertson Jr., the wide receiver, is on the board, and that's who JD loves. We could do that because we have a second round pick, and we see that offensive linemen, tackles in the second round tend to hit as well. Especially if we're reading the board well and we see that there's a guy we love. Maybe it's Morgan. Maybe it's Kingsley, right? There are some other players there. Now, personally, I would want to secure the offensive tackle first.
Yes.
because I feel a lot more secure that if we get a second round pick, we could even combine it with some other capital, even our third round pick or a fourth round pick, get up a little bit and secure a guy like Ladd McConkey or Roman Wilson or one of these guys that might be available early in the second round. Although McConkey, I'm kind of running out of hope that's going to happen. I think he might sneak his way up into the first.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I want to get into that a little bit more. I want to check in with the chat. We got a super chat and there's just some other comments in there that I want to get to, but I like the idea of the trade down. I want to get more into that with you in a second here. Blitz Crew, friend of the program, comes in. Thank you so much for the super chat. Says AR wants a vet center. Maybe Andre James from Vegas would allow Tippmann to play guard. If we sign one offensive tackle with AVT, we'll have flexibility in the draft. Now, this is an interesting point, right? Because we talked about the flexibility of both Joe Tippmann and Elijah Vera Tucker. But what do you think of this scenario, Jeremy, where they sign a veteran center, whether it's someone like Andre James or even if it's retaining Connor McGovern, like a veteran center and also a guard? Do you think that's something that's possible, or is this more wishful thinking, do you think, from Blitz Crew?
No, I think that it's not ideal. It's not what I want. But again, we can't control free agency. We can't control the draft and how the board's going to fall, what's going to be offered to us. The great thing about AVT's flexibility, the great thing about Joe Tippmann's flexibility is we could have a McGovern re-signed real cheap, have him waiting in the wings. We know he's very serviceable as a center. You know, as much as people don't love him, he's not a star. He's very serviceable. And up until last year, extremely available as far as healthy. So look, a backup plan could be AVT moves out, Tippmann moves to guard. You got McGovern at center. You re-sign McGovern, worst case scenario. If there's an injury, you have depth in the interior of the line. McGovern is a great guy to have, and to me, ideally, as a backup. As a veteran backup, right? A good mentor for the younger players. He's already helped Joe Tippmann a lot. Having a guy like that is invaluable. We see how many injuries we get. If McGovern comes into the game because of an injury, I don't think we're panicking as a fan base. We know he can do the job.
I like the idea. I was just going to say, I like the idea of bringing McGovern back for a backup role because he signed very, very cheap late last year. And he got hurt this year. So I don't think his market's going to be crazy high. I would prefer not to start him, right? Like, as you said, as a backup. And you also have Wes Schweitzer. So I think you could do a lot worse. And we've seen a lot worse, frankly, for backups on the interior than, your top two guys, Connor McGovern and Wes Schweitzer. You have Carter Warren, who could be a swing tackle for you. I'm not the biggest Max Mitchell fan, but, he's still someone who's under contract for the next couple of years. Suddenly, it feels like your depth is getting a little bit better at that point. But something that I'm just so curious to see, and again, we really won't know this until March, but what is their plan for these guys on the offensive line, the ones with the versatility like Tippmann and McGovern? And I think we'll have such a better idea once names and dominoes begin to fall a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something like there's so much negativity coming out of last season. I think that if you're going to hold on to some positive and you want to think positively about the Jets, some of the positive is the versatility of guys like AVT and Tippmann and even McGovern, who we know wants to be a Jet. Because these guys can move around, because they could shuffle around, it gives us options to go out and get the best people and not have to worry about position and limit it by position. It's a nice place to be as far as that's concerned.
Absolutely. I want to go to Jet Engine next. He sends in a super chat. Thank you, Jet Engine, for your support. He says the interior offensive line is already on the team, kind of going what we were just saying here with Elijah Vera Tucker, 𝐒𝐿 and Joe Tippmann. So that's an interesting one. They'd have to, not have to, but in this scenario, I would imagine they're moving on from Laken Tomlinson, which I'm not necessarily opposed to. I think he's been underwhelming as a New York Jet so far, but I want to hear from you, your thoughts, Jeremy, on this starting trio as the interior and potentially moving on from Laken Tomlinson.
I mean, look, I understand it if they do it. Because if Laken Tomlinson, we could save $8 to $9 million in salary cap by cutting him. And I know people say, yeah, but it's a big need. We're going to leave ourselves emptier. The reality is the way he's playing, you could put pretty much any serviceable player in there. and get the play that you need, the same play at other position, which is not good enough. The only thing that concerns me about this, again, is I would just prefer that McGovern is a depth piece and you don't go in starting him as a starter, because who's behind him? I think we're thinner in this scenario. I mean, there's no doubt the Lakin, his level of play has really set this team back. I think they believe that I don't think or know that they are going to give up on Lakin Tomlinson.
Yeah,
so it's really hard to say. It's hard to predict what they're going to do.
I don't think they do. I'm not the biggest Lakin Tomlinson fan, but I think this staff really likes him and would probably, I think we're more likely to see him restructure than just be cut flat out. And if you're saying that it's Lakin, Tippmann at center, AVT at right guard with 𝐒𝐿 and Wes Schweitzer as your depth options on the interior, I think that's probably more likely to be the case. That would be my guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, Jet Engine, I could live with this. Like, on paper, this works fine for me. I mean, I still want to know where our tackles are.
Yeah.
But, if we invest heavy on tackle, free agency and draft, and then we have the depth of Carter Warren, and, I know you don't love Max Mitchell, but if he's the number 9, number 10 offensive lineman on the roster, that's as good as any other NFL team. So I could live with that, but it still makes me feel uneasy because it still feels a little thin on the inside if there's an injury.
Yeah, if you would tell me straight up, those guys each are going to play 17 games and not miss a snap, then I'll say, okay, yes. But with the Jets' history over the last couple of years, specifically on the offensive line, are all 3 of those guys guaranteed to play all 17? Probably not. And that's where I think you run into some issues, which is why I agree with you, by the way. I as well would rather 𝐒𝐿 brought back as some depth option there. Couple other things wanted to pull up in the chat just because Jeremy's getting some love. Scott V says very cool data, so thank you for checking that out. Ryan says this is awesome to see this laid out this way. Jets Talk 24/7 hanging with us, absolutely love that. And Jordan, who's a member of the channel, says I like these charts, well researched. So look at that, Jeremy. Positive results already. 1 episode in, we're off to a hot start.
Hey, it would be horrible for me not to point out and thank a friend of mine, Tony, who's been in a lot of my videos and everything, who sends me a lot of these links as well. So I did have some help. I do have a partner in my life.
Jeremy up
that is him. Yes, that is my guy.
He's the guy pulling the strings behind the curtain, I guess.
Yeah, he's been a great partner to my channel. So he's my kind of my data guy. He's my GM behind the scenes. So
I absolutely love it. So something that you were mentioning before we went, actually quickly, while we're at roughly the halfway point of the program, I see, we had Ryan in here, 𝐒𝐿𝐫𝐞𝐞 in here. He's saying, boys, want to give a shout out to the other programs that we just launched on the channel. So make sure on Monday nights to tune in at 8 o'clock to Ryan and Dom C. They're covering all things Jets draft, anything Jets draft related. It's going to be a year-long show. So even after the draft, breaking stuff down, there's always a storyline out of the draft and a Jets connection there. Love the new edition of Armchair GM with 𝐒𝐿𝐫𝐞, by the way, and Green Bean. It was a fiery first episode and so entertaining to watch. And then on Thursdays, we got this thing, the little reality check, where we're going through and talking about the biggest storylines from Jets land and saying if it's realistic or not. And also, before we get back into it, the Talkin Jets draft party, got to shout it out. It's on the ticker down below. You can get your tickets at talkinjets.com. We are hosting our first ever draft party, as Snowball says, on Long Island, not in Long Island. Green Bean made a mistake saying it was that we're doing it in Long Island. It's on Long Island in Farmingdale on Long Island at the main event. Really excited for that. You got an open bar. We're going to be doing raffles. We have a buffet. Crowd cam going off for anyone there for reactions and stuff like that. It's really going to be a ton of fun, so make sure to pick up tickets for that as well. All right, Jeremy. So you were just talking about, before we got into some super chats and some of the comments, about the idea of trading down in the draft so that you could pick up that second round picks, the elusive second round pick that the Jets don't have. If they were to do that, how far, like, is there a limit to how far down you want to go? Is it a point where you're like, I don't want to drop past, we'll just throw an arbitrary number out there, 20, or are you comfortable moving back relatively far?
I don't want to go too far. I would say, and I do this. Obviously, the mock drafts, the rankings are screwed up. I don't look at it as reality, but when I'm trying to be realistic, I'm trying to forget the rankings in the app, and I get offered the trades. It's right around that 22, 23 mark that I start to get. That's kind of like where that line is.
Okay.
That's kind of where that line kind of sets in. I gotta say, the one great thing that came out of the Senior Bowl for me personally was Tyler Guyton.
Yeah.
Because that opened up so much for us as far as being able to expand that range of that first round. Because I honestly believe the way he played and being able to compare him to Faago, I can barely say his name, to be able to compare him, to see them taking reps at the same time on the same day and how they played was a great opportunity to say, hey, this guy's not that far off. Because especially day one, I walked away thinking, who's the best tackle here anyway? Because Guyton absolutely was dominant and fantastic. So being able to be really excited about another prospect that I didn't go into that week excited about really opens up a lot in the draft, because that could be 3 or 4 spots of safety to move down, right? Because obviously not every team is taking a tackle. So it was just great to see that. It was great to see him play so well.
Yeah, absolutely. I that was a big takeaway for me as well. I thought he absolutely, like, going into the Senior Bowl, it felt like he was someone who was like maybe a borderline first round pick. Like, there's a chance he goes, maybe he drops into the second. I think with how he played, he guaranteed that he's going to be a first round pick. And I like him a lot. I'd feel comfortable if the Jets moved back and got him. And then would that be like, is that your plan? Would you move back, target Guyton, and then go wide receiver in round 2?
I think that's where I'm leaning. Now, there are some guys who can slip. So again, I like the idea. It's because first of all, if we did a move like that, if we traded down that far, we're going to get offered more capital than a second round pick. If you want to go from 22 to 10, you're giving more than a second round pick. So to me, that's capital to then trade up from that second round pick, possibly, right? Into the back of the first round, into the early picks in the first round, in the second round. So that's what I'm hoping, because even in the second round, the guys I'm eyeing don't look like they're going to slip past 40, right? I know some people disagree. But based on just how early we are in the process and how a lot of the guys we've been eyeing are only helping themselves, like a guy like Roman Wilson, a lot of people thought third rounds. No way. No way. He was such a standout player at the Senior Bowl. It's very hard for me to imagine that Roman Wilson's going to be, like, you're going to have to hope to get him in the early second round. And the same thing goes with 𝐒𝐿_McConkey. So, I think that we need someone who, again, we're not looking for someone that's going to slowly develop over a few years. There might be some wide receivers like that. We're saying how we want a couple of guys that we have a somewhat high confidence level are going to be plug and play and be able to complement and help Garrett Wilson. And those are a couple of guys that I think can and will. It's just a matter of how far and how aggressive can we, be, and how much maneuvering can we do to make sure that we're there in the second round to get them.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about just a second ago Guyton and how good he was at the Senior Bowl, helping his stock. I think you throw 𝐒𝐿_McConkey and Roman Wilson in there as well as a couple guys who they feel like they cemented themselves as early day 2 guys, right? And you mentioned McConkey, maybe he ends up going in the first round, but I've seen mocks where it's like, oh, Roman Wilson, maybe the Jets take him at 72. He's fell to the 4th round in some mocks. I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. I think he's going to end up being a top 50 pick probably off the board.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, these are prime positions. wide receiver in the NFL nowadays because of the cost. There's always teams looking to just refuel, have talent, on the cheap for as long as possible. Look at the guys that are running out of time or are going to cost a lot of money in free agency, and it's just a good route to go. Plus, we see a lot of wide receivers lately in the last couple of years making a big impact in their rookie and sophomore years. More than I've ever seen. Like, look, when you go back to last year and you look the year before that, look at how many rookies performed.
That's true.
Typically if you went early, with the exception of Puka.
That's right. So we got a couple more super chats to get into. We do have something else that we could get, another topic we can get into even after the super chats, but wanted to get to Air Rosie. Thank you so much for the super chat. Says sign free agents, right tackle from New England. So are we talking on 𝐒𝐻𝐿 or Trent Brown? I would guess on 𝐒𝐻𝐿, right? For more of the right tackle. I think Trent Brown was playing left for them. Anyway, Jonah Williams from the Bengals, guard from the Ravens, Zinter, wide receivers, Hopkins, Samuels, backup quarterback and running back, play AVT, ease him back in. However, may be hard to sign free agency because everyone is on the hot seat. Jeremy, this feels like, love our guy Air Rosie. This feels like some Madden dreaming to me. I would be stunned if the Jets could sign all these free agents listed off here.
Well, they all have to be willing to come to the Jets, right? And the only way to guarantee that is to overpay. And when you overpay, and we could do this on another show for those who don't think the salary cap is real, or those who are under this delusion that we're in good shape come 26, 27, I could show you something that completely dispels that. So if you care about the future of this team and want to maintain some level of competitiveness and maintain our star players, and we're going to be realistic just about the reality of they're all willing to come here. This is a great dream scenario. I get it. But it's still, even if you can get all these players to come here, it's hard to imagine that scenario where you're not totally just mortgaging and just putting everything into these next 2 years and saying, we will completely just rebuild the team starting in 2026.
Yeah, that would be incredibly challenging. But of this crop, because that's 3 offensive linemen, 2 wide receivers, a backup quarterback, and a running back, I think you're looking at 1 of the 3 offensive linemen, 1 of the wide receivers, a backup quarterback, and a running back. I think that is more realistic, and especially because Brown, Williams, and Zinter are all going to get paid at like the highest on this free agent market, right? Like none of these options are really bargain bin on the offensive line. And Zinter at guard is going to get probably what, $15+ million.
I'd rather take the Zinter that's going to be a lot less expensive in the 3rd round of the draft.
Yeah, I mean that's true. that's a good point there. It's again nice to think about, and those are good targets. I don't think all of them are going to be willing to come here. Number 1, the Jets can't afford all those people. Number 2, but the positions are correct. Offensive line, wide receiver as the focus, with backup quarterback and running back as well. I think those are obviously all things we could agree on with that. And then Blitz Crew comes back in. Thoughts on trading down and getting Mims instead? What's your take with Mims?
Darius Mims?
Yeah.
The last name is not the best. Don't tell Greenbean that. Is that what you said?
Yep.
I know. Look, I haven't, and I actually, it's so funny because I invited Tigo to watch some film with me. I have access to a lot of college all 22, and Darius Mims is the player I wanted to spend time with Tigo looking at. Like, that was one of the guys I had planned to propose to him that we watched together, because he's probably a guy I've looked at the least. Look, he, the little bit of information, what I've read from Dom C, he could potentially be very good. I think there's a little bit more of a risk factor with him, but I don't think it's a ceiling issue. I don't think there's an issue on his ceiling. I don't think there's an issue that he can't be a starter that's very good. I think that with him, you're taking a little bit more of a risk.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm with you, because I was going to say my rebuttal, or not necessarily rebuttal because I agree with you, but my thing was going to say he hasn't played a ton. at Georgia, right? Like, it's great that he's playing in the SEC. Obviously, that level of competition's awesome. He's played well. It's not like his tape is bad or anything like that. I mean, there's a reason why he's going to go in the first round somewhere. I would be nervous about, there's a higher variance, I feel like, with Mims, and especially coming off of Mekhi Becton, the higher variance guys scare me off a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. And and it's a technique thing. It's like if you haven't played a lot, when you have to face, the pass rushers in the NFL, is he going to be able to, again, it's more of a year one versus, like, I would love a guy like that if we weren't in such desperate need to plug and play somebody. But if we were in the position of second round, we have an aging tackle on our team, a Darius Mims, right? And here's a guy we're going to develop for a year. And then his second year, maybe even his third year, he's going to be the guy that comes in for that veteran. Great. Do I trust him to come in and play game one in 2024? I just don't know.
I'm with you. Just hard not to laugh at this. Our two guys, Dom C and Green Bean, with back-to-back chats. The first one from Dom C on Mims, just raw, only 8 starts in college, which is not playing a lot, more of a developmental guy. Both Jeremy and I agree on that. Like, I don't think that's the route you want to go, developmental guy in a year where you're really pushing for it and going for it. And then Green Bean, polar opposite, goes, what a show. Screw you, Jeremy. So we put a nice little dig it at our guy, Jeremy, in there.
There's so many things I could never say on these channels because I'm usually with Green Bean. I'm a little scared of that guy, So, but now that he's not in here, that's my trademark thing. That's what everyone knows about me. When the person's not here, I'll say whatever I want.
Slimy little rat, you jerk.
As long as there's 2,600 miles between me and him, it's Taylor ham, baby. It's Taylor ham. Oh no, it's pork roll. Sorry about that.
So you don't even know.
I don't even know. What do I know? I'm from Brooklyn. I eat bacon with my eggs and cheese.
There we go. Now you're speaking my language. We did have another, I know we're pretty late in the hour, but we did have another topic that we were going to get into that I think is worthwhile to touch on in the last, 10, 15 minutes or so
Sure.
of the show, which is Aaron Rodgers. So we read the bombshell article last week from The Athletic. There were some things in there that probably that I mean, speaking for myself, some things that seemed like, yeah, that's legit. But one of the things that seemed to pick up as a little bit of a storyline is that there's starting to be this disconnect where the guys at Florham Park, they don't actually really like Aaron Rodgers. They think his shtick has gotten old. Him getting a ton of love from the coaching staff and him going on, the McAfee and saying all these things on the air. Where's your BS meter at, Jeremy? Are you buying that the players are turning on Aaron Rodgers?
Players, plural? No. Do I think there's a chance they're being honest that somebody in the building is tired of it? Sure. I'm tired of him going on that show and opening his mouth and wishing he would shut up. So it wouldn't surprise me if somebody in the building shared that information and said, I wish he would shut up. But the reality is the players, though, like to the point where we're going to blow this and escalate this to the players aren't happy with Aaron Rodgers, I think is absolutely the opposite of truth. I don't think you could be more opposite than that. And I think we both, talked about this right away. Our first reaction was, what award did the team vote and give Aaron Rodgers at the end of the season?
Yeah. I don't know if like if you really hate the guy, are you going to vote him most inspirational? And like, that's the thing too. It's not like, I don't know, Woody Johnson, Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh are handing out these awards, right? And saying, oh, this is the guy. No, it's the players themselves vote on and say for each one, team MVP, most inspirational, the good guy award, all that stuff. I don't buy it. Now, if, as you said, if you did a poll of all, we'll say 53 guys on the roster, are there going to be some who probably don't love him? Yeah, there are. But of the vast majority, we don't have the numbers because we don't have that ability, but I would guess 40, 45 of the 53 probably are all in on Aaron Rodgers would be my guess.
Yeah, I would say it's as high as any quarterback. Like, let's just say this. He's in much better position on the Jets roster right now in the attitude of the players towards him than Russell Wilson was going into last year. I can assure you that. So,
Fair.
I just don't think it's a story. I think 90% of that story was what we already knew. Everybody that's watching me right now in the chat, all of us, we all knew that there was something broken. None of us was celebrating Hackett and out there defending him and calling him a great offensive coordinator, right? So to have some parting shots from guys who were let go, to have some even people in the building that, and I love that term, in the building. So God knows what position they're in and who they are and what they know about football, because if you walk into Jets One Drive, you know how many different jobs there are there that have nothing to do with football. So it's just interesting to me that when a writer has the ability to just use the words, my sources are a source in the building, the flexibility and freedom that gives them, because that could be Garrett Wilson, or that could be the guy mopping the floor in the locker room.
It's possible. It's possible. But we'll never know also too, by the way. We'll never know from them, like who they actually spoke to. But so, the thing that you mentioned that I think is the biggest key with that story is 90% of the stuff we already knew. We knew Robert Saleh made excuses all year long, so that was not a surprise that he behind the scenes was doing the same thing. It was not a surprise that their jobs were, considered safe, because they acted like that after the first game of the year, and the rest of the way, it felt like Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh, to me, acted like they knew that they were going to be safe. It's what the most jarring thing from that was to me, and it has actually nothing to do with Aaron Rodgers, so I guess it's slightly off topic, but that they were going to Woody Johnson and telling him that we're going to start the youth movement, and him okaying that. Why does Woody Johnson have to get involved with anything like, I don't know, player related, where we're going to play this guy or we're not going to play this guy?
Yeah, look, if Woody Johnson has anything to do with that, if that's true, that's extremely and deeply disturbing. Because if history of being a football fan has taught me anything, owners involved in your team is kryptonite.
I agree.
I watched Jerry Jones destroy a dynasty in the 90s. I watched him destroy it by chasing away the guy who built it. So, and there's lots of other examples. I watched a general manager, because of the owner, destroy the Chargers and throw away Super Bowls because they had the best roster in football in the late 90s, early 2000s. And they decided to fire Marty Schottenheimer and bring in Norv Turner. So I've seen what bad owners can do. We've seen what a bad owner has done. We don't want an owner sticking their nose in there. And if he is, that's a huge problem. One of the reasons I've been excited about this team the last few years is I had believed that they gave the reins to Joe Douglas, and we didn't have to worry about that anymore.
That should be the way that it is, right? Like, I don't know. I just wish, and sometimes I get on, on my channel or my comments, sometimes people chime in and they'll go, well, Woody Johnson wants to win and he's willing to spend money, so he's a good owner. And that's half of it. You need to be able to have that, wanting to win and also be willing to spend the money. But you also at the same time have to hire the football people or whatever sport it is, the hockey, basketball, baseball people, and let them run the operations, and you stay out of it. You give them the piggy bank, whatever you need to make it work. Sure. But does Robert Saleh have to be meeting with Woody Johnson every week to go over who's going to play and who's not going to play? I don't think so.
No, I would hope not. That's a problem. And I think the fury of the fans would be warranted if it was true. I think that's what's not okay is when we're acting as if that's the facts and we don't know. And that's the thing that discourages me, when people will just believe whatever they're told. And, I'm always like, if I don't see evidence of something, if I don't see proof of it, I'm not going to just go crazy believing it, because I've just too many lies out there.
Air Rosie chimes in with another super chat. Thank you so much again. Says, I'm 60. The Jets have been rebuilding for 53 of 60 years. Time to win. play with cap. Running back is cheap. I think that could be done. Agreed. Draft players to replace the free agents in 1 to 2 years. Hardest part is getting them here. I do agree with Air Rosie on with most of this, especially the last line, though. The hardest part is getting them here.
Yeah.
That is, I think, is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, and I'm not against playing with the cap. I believe 100% in balance, and I think balance means there's some sacrifice of the future to try to get the talent in to win now, versus don't kill the team for the future. And the only reason I say don't kill for the team in the future is because it doesn't work. Like, it could work, but if we don't win the Super Bowl in the next 2 years, to say you're willing to then throw away everything that we had built, it's not how New England did it. It's not how Green Bay does it. It's not how Baltimore does it. It's not how Pittsburgh has done it. It's not how Detroit just did it. It's not how San Francisco does it. So if we look at the teams that have won Super Bowls and that for the last 20 years have run organizations that give their fans a competitive team every year and then runs at the Super Bowl. And by the way, I forgot the most important team, Kansas City. It hasn't been done by throwing everything into the pot for 1 year and living year by year. Do you want to be the New Orleans Saints right now? Their future does not look too good because they did that and they didn't get the Super Bowl. Now, I want to say there's an outlier that people bring up. I don't know if it's an outlier, the Rams. And I want to make it very clear about the Rams. The Rams had more drafted players on their roster when they won the Super Bowl than any team in the NFL. So as much as people want to say, oh, they did it, they didn't do it. They brought in the final pieces at the end when they already had the roster to back it up and allow those players to help them.
That's the key part, is you have to have that already established unit and then be willing to. I know they went like a million years without a first round pick, and it caught up to them last year, but then they're right back in the mix again this year, in a playoff game right down to the very end. So it's interesting. I don't think there's one necessarily right way or wrong way to do it, but you're right. If you're going all in, it has to work, because if it doesn't, then it's going to get real ugly.
Right. So the decision they have to make is this roster good enough to say, let's go all in, and those players that we get are going to actually win us the Super Bowl, not make us the playoffs, the Super Bowl. If you're going to throw it all away over, in 2 years from now, it has to be a Super Bowl. We can all agree on that, right?
Yeah, it's not go 9-8, be the 7th seed, get blown out by Kansas City in the wild card game. It's exactly, you go on a nice little run here too. Crossfire was having some trouble with some super chats, so he did a little test action. This one went through. Crossfire.
Thank you, Crossfire.
We appreciate it as always. He is, he's always in these chats, hanging out with us, showing love to the new shows here, which we're, really excited to get into. Episode 1's been a blast so far, Jeremy. You're not a bad co-host. I don't know what Green Beans say.
I know. He just takes these shots at me, beats up on me and everything like that. But I think it's made me stronger.
Yeah, I think it definitely has. And plus, your guy, Tony, behind the strings, pulling the marionette back there, he's the real brain behind this operation.
That's right. I'm just the pretty face.
Boy, did I get lucky. This is the pretty face?
In some worlds. If you went to the planet of what is the Klingons,
then you're the pretty face.
I think an Earth woman would find me very attractive if she was stuck on the planet of Klingon.
Maybe you do very well there. You'd pull some good numbers there, I think. Guys, before we get out of here, Blitz Crew saying, but make sure to drop those milk thumbs, leave a like before you go. Make sure to subscribe. We're doing not only the new shows, but we're posting some clips from these shows as well as regular videos. Monday, you got Dom C and Ryan doing the draft stuff. Tuesday, regular Talking Jets panel, 2 hours, 8 to 10. Wednesday, you got Green Bean and Tigo up there at 8 o'clock. They're going to, what's the over under? We're going to say by the draft time, do they fist fight before or after the draft this year?
Do they fist fight before or after the draft? Definitely before. I mean, I thought it was going to happen yesterday in that first show.
was so good. We got another one from Air Rosie in here saying, "You're not sacrificed. You are drafting players to replace them. Rodgers is here to win. I want a Super Bowl in my life. Coaches are all in or they're gone." I think we could all agree that this is the year that they need to win. Like Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh can't afford another 7-10 season. They have to win this year.
Yeah. And Rosie, I'm not opposed to what you're saying. I've, since I've been, 10 years old, it's been 43 years now for me. And it's absolutely agonizing. And I do have a giant fear that it won't happen in my lifetime. It might be the biggest fear I have, which is sick. I need real therapy for that. But honestly, if you said what would be the biggest regret if I died tomorrow, it would be that the Jets, I never got to see the Jets win a Super Bowl, that I never had that joy. So I'm going to say this. If they're going to make bold moves and sacrifice the future or hurt the cap later on, it better work.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm say. Because can you really tell me that any of us are ready to start over and go through the rebuild again?
See, the thing that the point that Air Rosie brings up, which I think is the right point to bring up, it's been in a rebuild forever. It feels like the last 13 years. They have the longest active playoff drought in all the major sports. It's not just the NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL. Even the Buffalo Sabres, they haven't made it in 13 years also, but the playoffs are in April versus, January. So they're right there, but what
was the biggest cause of that drought? If you look at the biggest mistakes we made since 2012, in my opinion, this is just my take, and it's not against what we're saying, but the reality is the biggest moves we made were high profile, high big names, free agents, spending tons of money on big names and never investing enough in the trenches, never investing enough on the offensive line, never focused on quarterback and getting the right quarterback, never being able to find the quarterback. Like those have been the reasons we haven't won, not the lack of signing free agents. Le'Veon Bell, Decker, Marshall, all these guys. Right? It didn't get us to even the playoffs, yet alone a Super Bowl. The teams I see going to Super Bowls are the team that find and develop their own stars. That's just blatantly obvious when you look at winning football teams.
I was going to say the biggest reason is they drafted like shit. Rex Ryan was a terrible talent evaluator at the college level. He was good with, finding guys like Bart Scott, bringing him over, Jim Leonard, bringing him over. And they had some, James 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐵𝐻, some role players like that. But man, those post Mangini into Rex Ryan and John Idzik drafts, those are some rough stretches, man. Just rough stretches.
And that's the one thing that I'll defend Joe Douglas with. And I don't care about when someone wants to pull out the 2020 or name players. No, if you look at the roster he's built from when he took over, really had full control in 2020, when we started all this and I got to know you, the team that we were back then when all we had was Mims and Becton, those were our two big, great players. And Marcus May and Q. Q was the only guy we had that's left from that. And you think with all those guys gone, missing on Zach Wilson, how could it possibly be that we could even be talking about competing next year? That's because JD did everything else right in building a real roster or starting the foundation of a real roster for us.
This is a great point. I could do this for another 2 hours with you, Jeremy. It's been an absolute blast. But as Tony chimes in, says, you guys need to press like and subscribe to all three channels. Absolutely. Subscribe here, Talkin' Jets. Go over to Jeremy's channel. Subscribe there. Always doing entertaining content. And even Tony, the GM, making some appearances as well. Subscribe to me, Matt O'Leary, and why. Jeremy, I'd say successful first episode. I had a lot of fun. I hope you did too.
I had a lot of fun. And to me, that's the definition of success. I appreciate everybody in the chat, whether you hate what I said, whether you liked it, whether you opposed me, whether you agree with me, I don't care. Appreciate your support. Appreciate you being here. It's all about talking football. It's all about talking Jets. We don't have to agree, but we're giving each other what we want, right? We want to talk about the Jets. We want to debate. It's healthy. It's what we should do as a fan base. We're certainly not getting the payback from the team. We may as well give ourselves the payback from each other.
Absolutely. I love it. I'm excited for next week. Make sure to stay tuned on the channel for even more content coming from Talking Jets next week. For Jeremy, I am Matt O'Leary. We'll catch you next time.